Is your company moving applications into public cloud? Well, now you have problems, as your on-premises security products don't work for public cloud, traditional security assessments don't give you the real picture, and the biggest security threat is now misconfiguration of your cloud workloads. CloudNeedy offers you a cloud-native approach to manage security, data privacy, and compliance. With CloudNeedy, you gain instant visibility into your security posture and the ability to continuously monitor and remediate any deviations. Take a free test drive of CloudNeedy's continuous cloud assurance platform by visiting cloudneedy.com/securityweekly. That's cloud, N-E-E-T-I. The greatest threat to businesses today isn't the outsider trying to get in. It's the people you trust, the ones who already have the keys, your employees, your contractors, and privileged users. 60% of online attacks are carried out by insiders. To stop these insider threats, you need to see what users are doing before an incident occurs. Observe It combats insider threats by detecting risk activity, investigating in minutes, effectively responding, and stopping data lost. Give it a test drive at observeit.com/securityweekly. The modern attack surface is vast and permeable, extending from the data center to the cloud and device edge. Security teams are stretched thinner and thinner as they try to cover this ground. The result? More high-profile breaches hit the news every day. Don't let your organization be next. ExtraHop delivers security from the inside out, helping enterprise security teams detect threats up to 95% faster and cut staff time to resolve by 2/3 or more. Act with confidence. Learn more at extrahop.com/securityweekly. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. This segment's also brought to you by 2FIN. Networks are becoming increasingly complex and fragmented. Boy, is that a true statement right there. And digital transformation and DevOps are driving an explosion in network connectivity changes. This is also very, very true. With each new network connection, cyber attackers may gain another opening to breach or traverse the network. At 2FIN, they've pioneered a policy-based approach to network security management using automation and analytics. As a result, you can make network changes in minutes rather than days, reliably and securely. To learn more about 2FIN, security policy compliant, the security policy compliance company, go to securityweekly.com/2FIN, that's TUFIN, and sign up for a free evaluation. Alrighty, and we are going to be at InfoSec World April 1st through the 3rd at Disney's Contemporary Resort. That's right, you can get a discount code by going to infosecworld.misty.com. Use the code OS19-SECWEEK. Also, if you're going to be at InfoSec World, you can go to securityweekly.com/conference request. From there, you can request a free briefing with us or a paid interview that will air on this show. Alrighty. What do we got today in the news?
So the K2 article we kind of already covered in the last segment with the funding and what the announcement was.
They said they got 0 days taken care of.
Yeah, they say they got 0 days taken care of.
Okay.
Yeah, assuming you understand how your application works and which system calls they're using and you block them, then yes, you can do it. And assuming you're not running an ECS, EKS, AKS, GKE, or Fargate.
Yeah, that's
Did I summarize that well enough?
So you really need, in K2's case, now I'm getting all confused, it's installed in the kernel or privileged container?
I think it's kernel. I think it's a kernel-based agent. It says agent on the website. It doesn't say kernel. But the only way...
Does the agent, and the agent does they say doesn't go in the container?
Right.
Okay.
I don't think it's going in the container because they say it doesn't need any instrumentation. And it doesn't need...
You know, someone from K2 is going to, like, flag us down at RSA.
They
and correct
will.
us
That's
on that.
okay.
And I hope they do.
I'm glad to have this conversation because I want to understand a little better.
Yeah.
But my guess is it's a kernel-based agent that's doing syscall monitoring so that it can actually prevent malicious types of syscalls from executing, which gives them the ability to prevent certain attacks.
I have 2 companies in here that I really like for this level of protection. I didn't add the Polyverse in there. They had an announcement. I like that as a first when you're building the containers.
Right.
Then once the container's running, because you still have the security issue when it's running, of course, I like Capsule8.
Yeah, Capsule8's
because I put
in
it
here as well.
inside the container.
Yeah. So Capsule8's the other one that K2 is going to compete with.
Sure.
In the what I call the cloud workload protection platform space, right? These folks, all these solutions are looking at
and it doesn't have to be cloud. In Capsule8's case, doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be.
Polyverse too.
True.
But the companies that are forward leaning in their technology are containerizing and therefore the primary consumers of this technology, because I don't think they're not having to go back and go, I've deployed 1,000 servers internally. Oh, let me go back and like retool everything.
Right.
They can't do that easily,
Not
right?
easily.
So the companies that have containers are like, oh, yeah, like I can totally take Capsule8's little, I don't want to call it it's not really a plugin. It's not even really an agent, but basically I can build Capsule8's functionality inside my container on the fly, my CI/CD pipeline. That's really easy. If it's Polyverse, hey, guess what? I can build a new container using their package repository, get those security features, test it. If it works, then move it into production. If I've already deployed it on even a VM or on bare iron, it's a lot of work.
A lot more work.
Yes.
To do. Yeah, and Capsule8 had an announcement in here, so while we're
on.
on.
Yeah, something about PCI. I'm not sure how. I mean, Jeff could probably tell us better how this integrates into PCI. They meet multiple requirements of the PCI DSS, including file integrity monitoring, intrusion prevention, and antivirus. I can see them covering. I did a technical briefing or two with Capsule8, and I agree with that statement. They definitely hit all of those areas and do it very well in my assessment so far.
We're actually going to do a webcast on the state of file integrity monitoring.
Because Logarithm has some functionality.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're going to do a state of file integrity monitoring, because this is a space that, look, PCI put file integrity monitoring on the map. It was one of the first requirements to come, standards to come out, talk about file integrity monitoring. There was, Tripwire was kind of the leader in this space. No one really did a bunch. Qualys has some capabilities now. You see file integrity monitoring at for container platforms with Capsule8.
I always felt that
got some capabilities.
Like a really large Tripwire installation of file integrity monitoring was a lot of work for not as much benefit as I thought I would reap from it. And we did have, like way back in the day, Tripwire had some, like, there was open source stuff based on I just felt like I didn't get I could put it this way: when I was managing, in this case, 100+ Solaris servers, right? I could look at logs and packets in my IDS and find more compromised systems than what my file integrity monitoring was telling me. Now, that's very specific to an implementation, to a specific technology, to a specific team who was maybe we weren't paying attention to it because we had other things to do. In other cases, I mean, obviously, Tripwire sold a lot of file integrity monitoring. It's solving problems for people. But me personally, I felt like what I got from, like, Tenable had some basic file integrity monitoring. Capsule8 has some of that as well. I feel like I could get that from other places and have it be valuable enough where I didn't have to put an investment in some. So if I have Logarithm and they have that, great. That's what I would do.
Right. And so that's why we wanted to talk a little bit about the state of file integrity monitoring, because it kind of went stagnant for a while.
It did.
It was Tripwire or nothing, but now you're starting to see other people bring file integrity monitoring capabilities onto their platforms. And the question is, it's kind of this, it's a space that's gotten interest again, and you're starting to see people do more around file integrity monitoring in different ways.
Sure.
And so hopefully on that webcast, we can talk about some of these different areas of file integrity monitoring and what do people really need to meet this requirement.
Yeah, and is it a feature or a product? I guess I've always looked at it as a feature. And there are some use cases where it does really come in handy.
Right.
Obviously, if the signature on your SSH server or client or authorized keys or things like that are changing, and you didn't change them. I also think there's a lot of attacks today on Linux that you could detect using file integrity monitoring, right? RunC was one of them, right? The attacks were resulting in replacing binaries.
You were
and
replacing
things like that.
files,
adding file, whatever.
Yep,
So there is a place for it, but anyway.
Yeah. So it's things like file integrity monitoring, some of these other capabilities Capsule8 added, which meets more of the PCI DSS requirements. That's basically what I got out of this article.
And this one was really puzzling to me. And I guess you could, I mean, certainly if you're from AT&T or Alien Vault, you could probably make an argument either way for this.
Agreed.
The direction they went was that AT&T is launching a security division. Alien Vault as a brand is now AT&T Cybersecurity.
Yes. So AT&T acquired Alien Vault last year. to augment its security services. They took that with their managed service capability, because AT&T has had a managed service.
Yeah, most of the big Verizon and others, yeah.
Yep, the telcos do. And they took both of those entities and spun it out as a separate cybersecurity division focused on that. But as part of that, they said, look, we're going to keep the AT&T branding, and we're going to drop the Alien Vault.
You know what's funny? What Robert Graham said in his article reminded me that in, was it Blade Runner or some sci-fi movie, they make a video call, and there's a logo of like one of the a Bell logo or an AT&T logo on the call. And that was the thinking back then, that technology that allowed end users to communicate would be provided by the telcos. Now, of course, today when we do a video call, what do we use? We use Zoom, we use Skype, we use other providers that are riding on top of the network. So it's kind of interesting that we're talking about AT&T's now cybersecurity, because if you're not going to be in providing the end user application game, right, you got to shift your business somewhere and expand into somewhere. A lot of them have expanded into cybersecurity, mostly in managed services.
They have, but they've always been kind of embedded under the umbrella. Verizon was like this for a while, right? Verizon had those capabilities up under the Verizon brand, but sometimes it's hard for that division to get any funding, bandwidth, whatever, because they were always under the broader.
AT&T's spinning it like out,
separate
like
division.
A wholly owned subsidiary more than a division underneath.
Yep. Okay. And so AT&T cybersecurity
is the wholly owned subsidiary.
Is the wholly owned, and it's going to focus just on security. It's going to take the Alien Vault assets. It's going to take their managed security service stuff, and boom, that's what it is.
Putting it in that context makes a little more sense, though. To lose all of that branding effort that you've gained with Alien Vault is concerning to me.
Yes, it could be.
Would be concerning to me as the marketing person. If I were the,
it depends. Who has the stronger brand?
AT&T has a really strong brand,
has a more
global.
If you think about it from a global enterprise perspective, AT&T might have the better brand recognition than Alien Vault. But if you're in the community, Alien Vault probably does over an AT&T. So it's a balance, right? And again, AT&T is selling services to the enterprise, so why not bring probably a better recognized brand at the enterprise layer of AT&T versus the Alien Vault brand? That's the decision they made. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's what the announcement was.
I love that we're talking about 100 gig. I think it's really cool. Napatech has accelerated cybersecurity and network monitoring to applications up to 100 gig. And I think these things always come and bite us, right? Like we hear 100 gig, we're like, by the time that makes it into my network, like I don't have to worry about that today. I think IPv6 is probably a similar thing, even gig and 10 gig, right? But that kind of stuff happens. And what you can lose sight of is all of the other things that you have to do to support this new technology as it makes its way into your enterprise. Typically, you can't just go start dropping in like 10 gig or 100 gig or IPv6. Like there's a lot of things that need to happen to fully support that. But these changes are coming. In fact, many of them are already here. I don't know how prevalent 100 gig is in enterprises today.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm relying on our listeners here because I'm out of touch. I know when I was doing really large enterprise design, there was 10 gig that we would use on backbones or talk about using on backbones. I think it did get implemented in organizations after I left. Now is it like the use case for 100 gig? I guess I can see that today.
You can definitely see it in certain areas in data center environments, right? Where you have it. There are others that are doing this. One of our sponsors, Extra Hop, has been doing 100 gig.
They said that they support 100?
I'm pretty sure they said 100 gig on that webcast.
Gig.
Yeah. So they were already supporting 100 gig passively in doing packet reconstruction and stateful inspection in a passive. Because I remember specifically on that webcast going, wait a minute, 100 gig passive full state? And he's like, yes. I'm like, that's amazing, right? Because if you think about
I talked about my experiences when I ran the university network as an example. We were pushing speeds. Not only do we have the capability to have a lot of bandwidth with internet and internet 2, being gigabit connected, when you bring in tens of thousands of students and academic researchers, you're pushing huge amounts of traffic through those pipes as well. Because I think there's a difference when people go, yeah, I've got a 10 gig backbone. They're probably not breaking the 2 gig mark on any, even on a spike, right? But when you put it in certain environments, I'm sure there's a lot of enterprise environments. My experience was with university environments. That gets put. I mean, you've got researchers that are, could be moving terabytes or petabytes of data because they're sharing information with another university. And then you've got students that are just downloading massive amounts of stuff
Video
all the
and
time and
stuff.
stream. I mean, today is more streaming, right?
Yeah.
Back then it was downloading. And so we would take vendors who had the claim. Now, Extra Hop, talking with Matt from Extra Hop, I'm like, you guys are awesome, right? Yeah. And they will live up to their claims for sure. And I think he did say he tested that or identify with my university example. But when I would take some vendor solutions, and not just security, but networking as well, I would see the network team bring in stuff. I would bring in stuff. We'd plug it into the network, and it would just melt. And they were like, no, this supports gig. And we're like, yeah, no, it's on fire in my data center right now. Like there's someone running to it with a fire extinguisher. So
yeah, and what was most interesting for me in this article, because I think others are doing this, is the architecture. And I go back to my days of doing the initial like QA testing at Tipping Point when it came out against Introvert from an IDS IPS perspective, right? The difference was, very specialized FPGA hardware and software versus ASIC based. Introvert was ASIC based, leveraging existing Intel processors. Really couldn't process the data fast enough, where you needed the specialized chipsets and software to do this. That's what they're using here to get to these 100 gig speeds, because it's hard for standard ASIC-based processors to keep up with that kind of bandwidth. Therefore, you have to start to go to specialized hardware and software to do this stuff. It reminds me of the old Tipping Point days of how we were leveraging their design versus introverts, and what kind of speeds could we get for both IDS and IPS back in those days.
So let's talk about Synopsys.
Yes.
We'll get to all of them today.
We might.
Let's do Synopsys.
I love this announcement, personally. Synopsys has been acquiring software assets for the past few years. And a lot of people may not know Synopsys in the context that I do, just from tracking the industry. A lot of Synopsys core business is semiconductor design.
I was going to say it's microprocessors.
Yeah,
or
it's
something
all
like that.
semiconductor design work,
yeah.
right? And so when you look, and the reason Synopsys isn't in my Security Weekly 25 is because they're not a core pure play security company.
Right.
They've got this big business in semiconductor microchip design, but they've built a pretty exhaustive.
Do they make chips for like network gear?
I think it's more designing of chips, not actually manufacturing the chips.
Right.
That's what I know them for.
Sure.
But they've been building an application portfolio over the years. They bought Coverity, they bought Black Duck, and they've assembled various components in the software space. This announcement is starting to bring those assets that they've acquired together in this new software integrity portfolio, and starting to bring those capabilities together. I think this is really important when we think about application security and where software is going, that organizations need not just source code analysis. They don't need just dynamic analysis. They don't need just software composition. Now, they need it all. They need all these components integrated into the new DevOps process, so that there are checks along the pipeline to look for security vulnerabilities in the environment. And so what Synopsys did in this announcement is, okay, I've got this portfolio, I'm bringing it together, I'm going to try to create a more integrated platform for DevOps teams, for AppSec teams, to really get our arms around these new applications. Great announcement, I thought.
Sweet. Linux security, it looks like this is a new company.
They've been around for a little while, CMD.
Okay. CMD, monitor, authenticate, and block user activity that goes beyond expected usage. It's a Linux security play on this one, which I like.
Yeah. You probably know a little more about this than I do. I know some folks that were evaluating this last year, really liked what they were doing. and I don't know how much traction they've actually gotten in the industry, but I know some very good friends that have really liked the solution. I just don't. I don't play with Linux like you do on a daily basis.
Yeah, and monitoring the user behavior is important. Earlier we talked about file integrity monitoring, and I think the problem with some of those solutions for Linux is, and for any operating system really, is what are normal changes to files and what aren't. And by monitoring the user behavior, you could say, oh, Paul's an administrator, and yes, he did update the authorized keys files, versus Paul wasn't logged into the system and the authorized keys files was updated. That's really bad if it can help with that level of analytics. A lot of platforms can, but this one was just kind of interesting, is specific to Linux.
Yeah. I want to talk about the Sentinel-1
Oh, yeah, we missed
article.
that.
Yeah, we skipped it because of the K2 overlap.
Yeah.
Releases full remote shell capabilities. So is this
What does that mean?
Yeah, so I'm asking you, as like a pen tester kind of hacker kind of guy, is this a good thing or a bad thing?
I don't know. I mean, full remote shell, just like, that seems like what an attacker would want. Yeah.
Right.
So it says full remote shell gives your security team a rapid way to investigate attacks, collect forensics data, and remediate breaches no matter where the compromised endpoints are located, eliminating uncertainty and greatly reducing any downtime that results from an attack.
So I get that, right? I get that you need forensics capabilities.
Yep.
But do I really want full remote shell capabilities available? Couldn't somebody potentially exploit that capability to gain access to the box? That's why I'm like, is this a good thing or a bad thing?
When you're managing the through Sentinel-1 console, so what does it say? Authorized administrator securely access their managed endpoints directly from the Sentinel-1 console. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
But if I compromise Sentinel-1, then I can do that.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Is this something that's good or bad?
Right.
I get it from a forensics investigation perspective, but does it also create a potentially new attack vector that maybe I don't want? So that's why I couldn't understand from an enterprise perspective, is this a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not sure.
Now, when I talk to most pen testers on the show and also off air, when we look at how we attack an enterprise, usually it's getting into like the systemic way that systems communicate, a la Active Directory, right? And that is so fruitful. I really don't believe that between that and the application, attacking the applications directly, that you need to kind of pivot into some of these other systems. Now, it does happen on pen tests where you do gain access to a system here or there that does have control of other systems. Typically, those aren't the primary targets, because I want to get into the underlying architecture and infrastructure. I get into Active Directory, then I can pretty much do whatever I want and be stealthy about it. But I think as that attack vector starts to close down, and it will over time before it shifts to somewhere else, this could likely be the other shift. If the protocols and infrastructure are locked down pretty well, I'm going to move up to an application layer. I'm going to look to get into a management system or some of these other vendor systems that do have that access. Maybe not as good as Active Directory, but might be close enough. So I think this is going to be a continuing trend of attacking these types of products. And nothing against Sentinel-1. I think it's a great feature to be able to do that, certainly. And they're not the only one that's doing it in terms of giving you access to things from a central console.
Right.
But I look at it as something that will be attacked more and more in the future.
Agreed. And this is one of the reasons why when we talked a lot about application security, container security, and having products that have root access, and then you see vulnerabilities like the run C vulnerability and exploit. That's the downside, right? Is that I give up these permissions, and then a vulnerability and exploit come out that basically says, look, if I gain control of that privileged container which has root access, I can take over your entire app. That's the scary side of having those types of privileges, whether it's at the host or within the container, that now create this new attack vector that, yeah, we were trying to do the right thing, but in the process, we opened up a brand new attack vector. So that's why I was curious from your perspective. Imperva made an announcement also on autonomous application protection capabilities. This is the Imperva Previty Imperva acquired Previty.
Yeah.
So now what Imperva is doing is leveraging that acquisition to bring some runtime application self-protection mechanisms into the Imperva portfolio. Again, I always have questions here because I track the runtime application self-protection market from basically its beginning. There were a number of vendors in the space. And we see this with others as well. You have the combination of the web application firewall and runtime application self-protection. The RASP component can help feed and close the loop on the web app firewall. So Imperva is going down a similar path to what we've seen from others in this space. It's a very logical announcement, which is why I think they bought Previty in the first place. So they're finally bringing the two portfolios together with some additional capabilities.
Are you familiar with Code Sonar?
I am not.
They seem to be touting themselves now more and more in the IoT space. It's static analysis tool, but they seem to be moving more. I always thought it was a more traditional static analysis tool, but they seem to be messaging more on IoT.
They are.
And had an announcement. One thing I thought, so they say stuff about IoT, about cross-platform languages and things like that. But the thing that got me was their API anomaly detection. I thought that was pretty cool. So they were contracted by DoD to investigate ways to automate and detect API usage anomalies, and now I've built that into the product. So their body of code is 7,000 C projects, 498 million lines of code. I think that is the real awesome thing about this announcement, to be able to analyze your APIs like that.
The first part of the announcement, I think, is just additional language support, some of which are being used by IoT. So you say, well, now anything that's built under these new languages, we can now do static code analysis on. Okay, fair enough. But you're right, the API anomaly detection, because this is going to be one of those evolving attack vectors. APIs are used everywhere in these new microservice-based applications. Lots of API communication.
Yes.
And the challenge here is people really don't understand all the API endpoints and all the API communication. And if you can start doing some detection around that and some monitoring around those API calls to protect them, I think that's where a big gap is. Again, back to my phone analogy. That app on my phone is communicating to something up in the cloud through an API. Is that API communication secure? And are the API communications on the back end of that also secure? That's a very hard problem to solve. So
it's
anybody
one that DevOps essentially created.
It is.
Because now we need, when you are orchestrating at that level and automating at that level, programs need to communicate with each other through APIs more and more.
Because we're not a single piece of code that does everything. We broke that code up to be more agile, more to give us performance and all the other things that we got out of that. But what we did is we created this whole new communication layer between all these endpoints that now is susceptible. And API security is a big component of where app security is going to continue to have to focus on. If this helps, great, because
and that's why you see new startups in this space and existing security companies making announcements to try and help customers with that problem.
Exactly, because it is a big problem. First of all, just knowing which API endpoints and APIs are out there, let alone all the protection mechanisms around those APIs.
Knowing is half the battle. BitSight was the only one I think we didn't talk about.
Yes. And this is interesting. This is doing, so BitSight does external analysis of people's website and risk security posture from the outside. What they're now doing is saying, hey, we've got all this data. How about we do some peer review so you can see how your external security and risk profile aligns to others in your industry. So this goes back to the old benchmarking discussion. We saw ClearPoint Metrics years ago get acquired by Encircle, which is now part of Tripwire, but you really don't see it. Tenable's made some announcements here on doing some similar benchmarking comparisons. This is yet another version of that. This is very focused on that external data that BitSight's collecting and allowing you to say, I'm in this industry, how do I stack rank against others? So I can either decide whether I'm good or I need to improve some of those external security concerns.
It all depends on how you use that data too.
True.
You know,
if you're going to use it to help justify some budgets and some improvements compared to the rest of your peers,
good.
If
you're just like, well, in a zombie apocalypse, I only need to run faster than my neighbors.
Yeah,
then not so good.
Not so good.
Not so good.
Yes.
You're going to get eaten eventually.
Yeah, eventually the bear will catch you.
Right. Some of those zombie movies, man, zombies run really fast too. So yes. One of the George Romero ones that was like lightning speed zombies or something. I think it was one of his and others.
Yeah.
They don't always move slow.
Yeah, and with zombies, the challenge is that they're just going to keep going.
So
eventually they're going to catch you.
Right?
Yeah.
All righty. Well, that concludes this edition of Enterprise Security Weekly. Hopefully we'll see many of you at RSA next week. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. See you next time.